Okay, so making some sourdough bread today, and this is a little video for any of my friends who are interested in trying it out themselves. Fed my starter last night at about midnight, and it's now coming up for 9 AM, so it's gone a bit past its peak. You can see that I've marked where it was up to, and it's definitely doubled in size. It's probably reached a little bit higher than that, and it's starting to come down, but that's okay. I can still use that. The alternative would have been, you know, getting up early in the morning and you feed your starter, and then you're not baking till kind of later in the afternoon. You got to wait about 5 to 6 hours. First things first is I'm going to do my flour and water, and that's called autolyse, or I think it's pronounced autolyse. And this is to just develop the gluten in your flour before you add your starter and your salt. So I'm going to do 300 grams of white. Now this is white bread flour. Then in that I'm going to add 50 grams of this stuff here, which is rye flour. And then I'm going to top it up to 500 grams using wholemeal flour. First of all, I'm going to get rid of the scales now. Going to give it a little mix just to make sure all that flour is kind of mixed together. This is 380 grams of water for 500 grams of flour. That's approximately 75-76 hydro. If I was to make this up to 80%, which would be 400 mils or 400 grams of water, that extra 20 grams of water is going to make this loaf a lot harder to deal with when it comes to shaping. So if you're making bread for the first time, you want to keep your hydration levels a little bit lower. Maybe even start with like a 360 to 500, something like that. I'm going to add the 380 grams of water and just mix it up. All this is doing is introducing water to the flour, starts to develop the gluten, and I'm going to let that sit for at least half an hour. Because my starter's gone past its peak, I'm not going to let it sit for an hour. I'm going to let it sit for half an hour, and then I'm going to add my starter and my salt. Okay, so that's had half an hour, and you can sort of see what it does. The dough becomes a little bit more kind of stretchy. 12 grams of salt and 100 grams of my starter. Basically, you've got to try and get that all incorporated into the flour and water. The way I do it is I kind of pick it up and start to fold it in so that I'm not just sticking my fingers straight into the starter. You'll see that that's kind of now in the middle of the dough. This is going to take a couple of minutes. I'll probably take about 2 minutes here to just make sure that this is thoroughly mixed. And what I'll normally do is get something like a bread scraper like this. I'll go around the bowl, make sure everything comes off the bottom. See, I don't want to see any patches of wet kind of starter, so I want to make sure everything is incorporated. And this kind of twisting method I find works quite well. Alright, so I've been mixing that now for a couple of minutes. As you can see, it's pretty well mixed, and I've got like a ball of dough. This is now the bulk fermentation part of it has now begun, because I've added the starter. This can take about somewhere between 5 to say 7 hours usually for me at this sort of temperature of my kitchen. We're going to do a series of stretch and folds every half hour. So I'm going to set the timer on my watch for half an hour, and I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to do the first stretch and fold, and I'm going to do that 4 times, and then I'm just going to let it sit. So the stretch and fold process is a replacement for kneading the dough. I'm going to show you the first stretch and fold and the last one. So I'm doing this every half hour since I added my starter. So I've added my starter, it's now been half an hour. I'm going to do the first stretch and fold. So it's over a 2-hour period. And all you do is sort of gather it up at the side like that, pull it up. Now what you'll see is at this first stretch and fold is that this dough, although the gluten's developed already a little bit, see it breaks apart pretty easily. So we'll probably do about 6 or 7. See how it's breaking apart? That's because it's not yet developed the gluten. So what I'm doing is stretching it out, folding it down. So that's it. That's all you have to do. A couple of them, and that's it. That's stretch and fold number 1. Now I'm going to do another couple of these, and then I'm going to film the last one for you to show you the difference between this one, the gluten, and the last one. Right, so this has had now 3 stretch and folds every half hour since I added the starter and the salt. So I'm going to start the stretch and fold again, pulling it up. You can see already it's much more stretchy, a lot smoother, and then you'll see the difference if I hold it up and start to pull it apart. You see this? You see this sort of membrane becomes sort of see-through. I hope you can see that. Kind of see-through. It's not breaking, you see? It's kind of like a translucent membrane now. Very different from the first fold. And that's good to go. So that now is going to sit in this bowl, covered up. Always got to remember to cover up, you don't want it to dry out. It's going to sit for about another 5 hours-ish. It's sitting in my kitchen, which is probably one of the coldest rooms in the house. A nice coolish room temperature, and that for me usually in this kitchen I just know it's about 7 hours, when it's usually almost doubled in size, maybe between 50%, somewhere like 75% in size increase. But I'm just going to forget about it really. So it's now just after 4 o'clock, so this has had about 6.5 hours, coming up for 7 hours. And it's not exact science, but I think that's I don't know, 50 to 75% in size. The dough's starting to ferment, starting to get little bubbles on top and everything. Now 7 hours is quite a long fermentation. If you've got a quite a warm room temperature, then it's probably going to be more like 3 to 5 hours to get to the stage. But I actually like leaving it in a cold room like the kitchen, because what happens then is I can just go off and do other things, and I don't have to keep coming back and checking it, because I know it's going to be a slow process for it to rise. So I'm not, the likelihood of me over fermenting it, overproofing it, is lower. What I'm going to do now is add some seeds. I've got some sunflower seeds here and some pumpkin seeds. Sometimes I put in a bit of linseed seeds or whatever. And obviously you don't need to do this. What I've found is when you add the seeds, it can, when you make the dough and everything, someone told me it pops the little bubbles that you've made inside. Now, I have noticed that you get a sort of tighter crumb, so you don't get the big holes in your bread, the big airy holes that you'd normally get without the seeds. I have noticed that whenever I add seeds, the big holes tend to go away. But I don't mind that actually. In fact, I almost prefer it because it makes a better loaf for spreading butter on and toast and all that. Sometimes the big holes are actually a little bit annoying, to be honest. So this is how I do it with the seeds. At this stage, I don't put them in at the start, because I've put them in at the start a few times, and what I've realised is that it's like it messes with the water content and they absorb all the water and everything. So this is the stage when I add them. What I do is I put about half like that, and then I start to kind of fold my dough over halfway like this. I'm also being quite gentle with the dough now. I'm not slapping it and pulling it and tugging it, because I don't want to lose all that air that's in there. The rest of the seeds go in. There's no measurements there, by the way, that's just like how many seeds I want to have in my bread. And then I'm going to start folding it over. Now, You would do something quite similar without the seeds to get it out and onto the chopping board, but this just makes it a little bit more tricky. But as you can see, I'm just working it gently in the middle so that they're all getting covered up, and then once I'm quite happy that they're all in there, I'm going to try and scoop this dough out in one big go and slap it on the chopping board. Here we go. And then slap that down on there. Right, now the temptation is to put a ton of flour onto your chopping board and start putting flour all over it at this stage. Avoid that, because what you're going to do is you're going to pollute basically what you have here with too much flour. It is maybe a bit scary to have all this sticky dough sitting there sticking, because you're going to use that stickiness for this bit and then the next stage. And the first thing you want to do is to pre-shape this into a little bit of a ball. So I've already kind of done that when I was pulling it in with the seeds. I've kind of shaped it into a little bit of a ball. Then I'm going to do a little bit more. And the way I do that is I put my hand here and I'm going to push up and pull back and use the stickiness of the surface. Nice push and pull. Now you see that dough's sticking, don't worry about it. I'm going to push, I'm going to pull, and then start to shape it into a bit of a ball like this, see? Now this is the bit that's going to give you trouble when you first start. This is the bit that's difficult, but you can see I'm starting to tuck it in, under, it's sticking, it's pretty horrible. But when I get it to a stage where I'm pretty happy that I've made a little ball, which is right about there, I'm going to pick up my bread scraper, and then I'm going to get all this stuff underneath, see? I'm going to just pull it in, and then sort of flick the bread round to shape it even more into a ball. Now this is a stage where a lot of people make mistakes and they end up with a flat loaf because they don't do their shaping properly. This is a stage that took me the longest to learn. It just needs a bit of sort of confidence in the way you do it and the way you touch the dough. It's kind of firm but gentle. Let that sit now for half an hour. That's it pre-shaped. This is called the bench rest, where it's going to sit here for half an hour. You can cover it up with a net or whatever. You don't want anything touching it. Don't put cling film on it or anything, because it's just going to stick all over it. Right, so this has had its 30 minutes resting, and I'm going to transfer it into this little wooden banneton after I have shaped it. Now you want to get this all well floured. I use this little tea strainer thing, so I've got that really well floured. You're really supposed to use rice flour, but I can never find it, so I'm just using plain flour. Then I'm going to flour next to the chopping board, next to the dough, and I'm going to flour on top of the dough like this, but not the bottom. Now some people use this, put this inside, flour this, put the dough on that. I find it's perfectly fine to just put it on the wood, doesn't stick. So I want to get this flipped onto this here. So you've got to be quite firm. Just until you feel it loose, and then onto there, right? So that's now turned upside down, it's not sticking, but this side is sticky, so I don't want to touch this side. And I want to kind of go underneath, and then I'm going to pull it out like this. Now there's loads of different ways to shape sourdough, loads of different methods. One I used for quite a while was I would fold it to here, then I would fold that all the way over, and then I would roll it up. But I found that the seams underneath were quite hard to get to come together. There's loads of other tutorials online and everything, but this is just the one that I find works pretty well. So what I do is basically just fold everything into the middle, about 5-6 folds. You want to stretch it out, pull it across, stretch it out, pull it across. Now you see where the stickiness comes in. This is why you don't want to put flour all over it. Stretch it out, across, sticking it down, making just a lovely little sort of parcel thing. Pulling it right across, and I'm going to take this one. See, I'm opening it up so I've got that sticky edge. and I'm pulling it right across. Now you see that? I've made it into like a sort of parcel. Then I'm going to flip it onto the seam like that and start to turn it into a ball. Now one of the ways I do this, I don't really use the bread scraper much at this stage, I just use my hands. And one of the ways I do this is I put it like that and then I pull it in. Now see what happens is it catches on the board. It starts to pull the skin of the bread tight. Now I don't want to go too far and break the skin, but I want to get a nice tight little ball. Got a bit of dough on my finger. So you can see all those seeds coming through as well. Now you can see how when just doing it like this and all the amount of folds I've done and everything, that the seeds are now well incorporated into this dough. That's why you don't have to mix it at the start. Now I'll just keep doing this for a little while. I'm being gentle with it, but I'm just making sure that it's all tucking under. I'm kind of pushing the dough under as I pull it. See like that? Tuck, tuck, tuck. Right, now I'm pretty happy with that. Now if this was a wetter dough, if this was a dough that I'd put a lot of like 80% hydration or more, it wouldn't be as easy to do it at this stage. This would start to pancake out. Right now, pretty happy to just tuck this all up. I usually just, I'm pretty slow at this stage. I don't want to go fast because I want those seams at the bottom to kind of settle onto the chopping board and flatten out a bit. So you can use your bread knife, bread scraper, you could just pick it up. But again, you kind of want to be confident with it. Put it in like so. And then what I like to do is take the bits that are kind of coming apart a little bit, the seams, and just give them a little pinch until I have something that's kind of all stuck together. Now that's it. If I was to leave this for like 2 hours now at room temperature with this little hat on, maybe put this little hat on, it would be ready in about 2 to 3 hours. And the way you test it is you give it a poke like this. Now see right now, if I put a bit of flour on my finger and I poke it, it's very, very springy still, right? There's a lot of proofing still to be done in this. There's a lot of sort of energy still left in the process. What you'd wait for is that when you poke it like that it pretty much stays down and then slowly comes back up. If you poke it and it stays down, it doesn't come up at all, you've overproofed your loaf. Now that's the danger with proofing it at room temperature, and that's why I like to do it in the fridge overnight, because it's very hard to overproof it. You put it in for about 24 hours. That's it. I'm going to wrap this in cling film so that there's no air getting to it. So I'm going to put it on the top and I'm going to put cling film around the bottom so there's no air even getting at the bottom of the bowl in the gaps, because you don't want this to dry out in the fridge. Put it in cling film, put it in the fridge. It's going to be in there for about 24 hours, 16 to 24 hours. So it's now time to bake this. It has been in the fridge for about 20 hours. So this is the dough. This has been, as you can see, it's kind of, it was a kind of ball. It's kind of proofed out a little bit. I find it doesn't really expand too much once you put it in the fridge. It kind of retards the dough quite a lot. The other advantage, by the way, quickly of putting it in the fridge is you're just going to get a much more firm dough to work with when you go to put it in the oven. You don't have to worry about it so much pancaking out or flattening out. 250 degrees is as hot as my oven gets, and that's been heated up, preheated to that temperature. You want to get your oven as hot as possible. And my Dutch oven is in there, and it's heated up with the oven. I've not slammed it in at the end. The Dutch oven has to get piping hot. Parchment paper on top, or baking paper, whatever you call it. Flip this, give it a tap, and it should just, if I just lightly, what you don't want to do is rip it off, just lightly lift, and there's your lovely little dough. Now at this stage sometimes I might brush a bit of the flour off, I might not bother, it's up to you. Now we're going to score the dough You can do the whole cross thing. You can do whatever you want. Some people do little leaf patterns and everything. You have to score the dough. Otherwise, what's going to happen when it goes in the oven, it's going to rise up instantly and start cracking all over the place. So you want to control that. When you hit the base of this onto the hot Dutch oven, the water in that's going to go instantly evaporate up through the bread. That's your oven lift. The way to cut it, get your little scalpel in like that, and then give it a nice firm like this. Right now I've hit a few seeds on the way, but you can see there probably about half an inch down. I hope you can see that, like about half an inch down. That's now ready to go in the oven. This bit I do as quickly as possible because I want to keep all the heat in the oven, and I want to keep the Dutch oven as hot as possible. And then this goes in, and you see the minute it hits that, you can see that expanding out, you know, that cut. That's because it's so hot, it's already starting to do the work. Lid back on quickly. That has to be on that lid if you want to get it all steaming up through. And then 25 minutes, full whack. We're just going to take the lid off. I'm going to put this down to about 200 because we're going to put it back in with the lid off for about another 15 minutes. Try and get the camera in there. It's looking really good. I'm going to pop that back in. 15 minutes, and we'll take it out and see the finished product. 40 minutes in the oven now. 25 minutes at full whack with the lid on, and then I've put it down to 200, and I've given it about another 15 minutes just to brown the outside, to brown the crust. Our loaf. Turn this oven off. Here it is. You can also you can give the bottom a little tap. That's the sound you want, that kind of hollow sound. And here's our loaf. Looking pretty damn good. If you're doing this for the first time, perhaps don't start with like wholemeal flour and rye and all that. Just make a white loaf, just to give yourself a base of where to go from there. Then you can tell what's changing things when you put in wholemeal and stuff. But start with white. So I would go with 500 grams of white bread flour, and then I'd maybe add like 360 grams, 360 mils of water. So see what it looks like inside. Whoa, listen to that. That's a crispy crust. Lovely stuff. Lovely stuff. Now if you were to bake that with just pure white bread flour, it would be a bit more like this throughout, a bit more kind of what we call an open crumb. But right now when I touch this, because it's still slightly warm, it's kind of tacky. It's lovely and moist. I don't know if you can see that up close. It's kind of glistening in here. Really nice and moist, really soft. It's got seeds all the way through it. Really nice crusty crust. Basically it's just fantastic bread. I'm just going to have this right now with a bit of butter and honey. You can see that's pretty damn good loaf of bread.